everyone. Yeah. And also welcome to our online audience. By the way, here, I want to test first to make sure our online audience can hear and see clearly. So we're really in a very technological advanced classroom. So there should be no problem for sound and the video effect. So if everything's okay, so I just want to start this special event. By the way, my name's Jiang Wu. I'm director of a Center for Buddhist Studies, and also am a faculty member at the Department of East Asian Studies. Today we have a very special event, and this event is co-sponsored by our generals, founders, and sponsors as well. So this lecture series, this lecture is a part of our Ōbaku Ingen Lecture Series, and also Lingyin Lecture Series and the Puyin Lecture Series. We want to thank all the donors and our supporters for support this lecture, very generous. So now I want to turn to our distinguished guest, Professor Max Deeg. Let me say a couple words of Max. Max Deeg is a professor in Buddhist Studies at Cardiff University, Wales, United Kingdom. His research focuses on the spread of Buddhism from India to China and the Chinese sources on India. He has worked and published extensively on the Chinese Buddhist travelogues, and at the moment is preparing a new multi-volume translation and a commentary of Xuanzang's Da Tang Xi Yu Ji. I don't need to remind you who Xuanzang is, right? So the most famous pilgrim to India, and his work Da Tang Xi Yu Ji is record of the western regions of the Great Tang. Professor Max Deeg is one of the two PIs on the Xuanzang Trail project, supported and funded by the Bihar Heritage Development Society in Bihar, India, which identifies and explores Buddhist sites recorded in the Da Tang Xi Yu Ji by Xuanzang. Okay. So then today's topic, the title of today's presentation is Donations to the Center of the World. Not to Center for Buddhist Studies, but I expect more donations in the future.
You will get the punya for that. The Gongde comes.
Gongde, yes, the Gongde puja merit will come to us. So the title once again is Donations to the Center of the World, the Chinese Inscriptions from Bodhgaya. Without further ado, please join me welcoming Professor Max Deeg.
In the Indian habit now. Thanks a lot for inviting me, giving me actually the chance to, for the first time, present that stuff in front of an audience. So this is, in a way, a side project of the project that Jiang just mentioned, the one I'm doing in India, in Bihar, which is, of course, slightly bringing me out of my comfort zone in terms of historical range. Albert just said, "Well, you have now." What did he say? You are now reached the. You are now enlightened that you reached the Song period. Normally, my cutoff point is, well, maybe 900,000, 907, I think, is the end of the Tang, right? So that's when I stop. But sometimes you move, and the material actually forces you to move. You will see that the inscriptions are the inscriptions that we have are actually from the Song period, and one of it actually a little bit earlier. So I call it Donations to the Center of the World. It may not become 100% clear when I'm going into the technicalities of the material, because the inscriptions are kind of reflecting a kind of donorship relationship that the Chinese, some Chinese had with some central spots in India, in this case, Bodhgaya, the place of enlightenment. So they donated, but they did not only donate, they took also stuff with them and brought it back to China. So it's both, it's working in both ways, but this sounded a little bit more sexy, the donations to the center of the world. the Chinese inscriptions from Bodhgaya in their Chinese context. So the last bit is also important. I could have concentrated completely on the inscriptions, no problem. There are not many, but they got enough content and problems and everything around them to fill a whole lecture and more. But what I intend to do here is to introduce these inscriptions and then kind of contextualize them. So actually show that the inscriptions that we have found in India, find more, actually have something to do with what we know from the Chinese sources of that period. And there are connections, as you hopefully will see at the end, or you will know at the end of the lecture. Okay, let's jump right into the lecture. So we have to start with this guy. I'm sorry, I can't help it. A quote: "Even when the great world is shattered by an earthquake, only this place," that is Bodhgaya, or the diamond throne, does not collapse. Therefore, when the Bodhisattva was about to realize full enlightenment and he passed the four corners of the diamond seat, the place of enlightenment, the whole earth shook. But when he then arrived at the place, the earth was calm and did not shake anymore. So this is part of the description by Xuanzang of the so-called diamond throne, of the place where the Buddha reached enlightenment. So this almost dramatic description of the Buddhist Sanctum Sanctorum at Bodhgaya in Bihar in India, diamond seat, the Vajrasana in Sanskrit, the Tingangzuo in Chinese, is found in the record of Xuanzang. It highlights the prominent position which the place of enlightenment had for Chinese Buddhists, not only for them, of course, but also for Chinese Buddhists over time, a position which, for some at least, also turned into an attraction which motivated them to undertake the long and dangerous journey from one Zhongguo, from one Middle Kingdom, to another one, that is Central India or Magadha, to the center of the trichiliocosm, the Sanxian Daqian Shijie, as is also said by Xuanzang. The most prominent sources, of course, of documentation of these journeys and all these places, including Bodhgaya, are indeed the so-called pilgrim records of Chinese monks who traveled between the 5th century and the 9th century, roughly. The earliest being Fa Xian's travelogue record of the Buddhist kingdoms, the Four Guoji, also known as Gaozhen Fa Xian Zhuan, the biography of the eminent monk Fa Xian. And the latest of these then being the rather dull and unorganized and short one by a guy called Wukong. The most famous of these travelogues, of course, is beyond any doubt the already quoted record of the western regions of the Great Tang, the Da Tang Xi Ji, by Xuanzang. Although we do not possess such travelogues from later periods, let's say the Sung period, we know that Chinese Buddhist monks after the Tang dynasty continued to travel to India to visit the most important sacred places of their religion, among which, of course, Bodhgaya stood out prominently as the center, or as the navel of the world, as it's also called in some Buddhist texts. It is in this longue durée context, from the Mauryan king Ashoka's appreciation of the Sambodhi, of the place of enlightenment, to the recognition as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the year 2002, in which I would claim the more recent history of Bodhgaya, with all its unfortunate aspects and pitfalls, starting with the Burmese reconstruction of the Mahabodhi Temple already before the archaeological exploits of Alexander Cunningham, and some of the vicissitudes of modern pilgrimage tourism can be seen and understood. The place where the Buddha reached enlightenment, Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, always had and still has a central meaning for Buddhists. And the sources presented and discussed here provide just one or another historical puzzle stone in the overall picture of this historical and religious importance of the site. So I have two chapters, more or less. One is pre-Sung, one is the Sung stuff, and I start with a chapter on Chinese inscriptions at Buddhist sacred places in India. Inscriptions, of course, have a long history in Chinese culture, the earliest being the oracle bone inscriptions, the Jiagu Wen, from the Bronze Age Shang period. Inscribed stone slabs or steles were in use in China well before the advent of Buddhism. Early Chinese Buddhist steles from the, for instance, Namdechao period mostly had a decorative front and inscriptions added at the back or at the side of the stone slab. Official or semi-official Buddhist inscribed steles from a later period mostly had the full-fledged, in some case, quite long text on the front of the stone slab with an ornamented headpiece containing the title or some other ornamental figures, a dragon or Buddha or whatsoever. Chinese inscribed steles at Buddhist sites in India must have looked quite exotic, not only because of the fact that they could not be read by the locals, because they were written in Chinese, but also because of their physical appearance. The height, the inscriptional lines running vertically instead of horizontally, as with an Indian inscription, Chinese characters, which look very different from the Indian scripts, the decoration, and of course, the ornamentation of the stone. The cultural value of inscriptions in China and in India were also quite different. In China, the text of an inscription or parts of it could be considered an aesthetical, calligraphical, or literary masterpiece and become the model of other inscriptions. So we've got quite a lot of examples. Of course, one of the examples I know of a little bit better is the Tō inscription, which made it into the poetic anthology Wenxuan, which is then partially copied also in the famous Xi'an stele of Christian Nestorian provenance. I do, however, not know any case where an Indian inscription had a literary impact on written literature. Rather, the opposite is true for India. Acknowledged parts or lines of literature, as for instance from the great epics, from the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, are quoted or referred to in inscriptions, which is the opposite. Another indicator of the high prestige of Chinese inscriptions as pieces of literary, cultural, and historical value is the custom of taking rubbings, chuanpa, and creating collections or anthologies of this type of literary productions. Some of them we only know by actually these preserved anthologies. The Chinese custom of erecting inscribed steles or stones to mark a visit or a donation to a place, even outside of China, is to my knowledge first documented as a text, not as a stone. In Sung Yun's record in the Luoyang Jielanji in the early 6th century for the northwest of the subcontinent in Gandhara, on top of a mountain where the text tells us that Sung Yun erected a stone stele at the place where the Bodhisattva in one of his previous existences sacrificed his body to a hungry tigress. If this is true, if he really did this, I mean, we don't have the stone, so no guarantee for that, but at least it's mentioned in the text. The earliest evidence of the erection of Chinese inscribed stone steles, Bei in Bodhgaya, comes from the early Tang period. So that's about the same time as Xuanzang. A very well-known Chinese envoy, Wang Xuanci, who visited India at least 3 times, arrived in the vihara, in the monastery at Bodhgaya, on his first tour in the year 645, probably just after Xuanzang had left India, and erected a stone stele with an inscription, which was unfortunately not be found. We don't have it. And it probably, my guess is, unfortunately in this case, it will never be found. But we have at least the poetic part of the inscription, which is preserved in some of the fragments of the otherwise lost itinerary or travelogue of Wang, which goes, I think this is, goes like this. So not the stone, but at least the inscription. The Great Tang, and I'm reading it out because it has, as you will see and probably anticipate, an impact in terms of form and content on the later inscriptions as well. Some motifs actually come through again. The Great Tang were blessed by timely luck and received the auspicious chart from heaven for a long and prosperous reign. They enlightened and regulated 6 cardinal directions, and their power and influence reached the 8 peripheral regions. India kowtowed, and monks and lay people visited the Chinese court, and thereupon the Tang sent illustrious envoys to look at the place of enlightenment, the diamond seat, where 1,000 Buddhas had dwelt generation after generation, to look at the real appearance of the venerated Buddha and at his major and minor marks made according to the model given by the Bodhisattva Maitreya. to look at the majestic beauty of the divine Supa, to look at the tree of enlightenment, luxuriant and well-spaced, not declining through the kalpas. How can there be more supernatural power than this? So that's the part which obviously was on the stone that we have not found yet, probably never found. One detail in this inscription is quite interesting in relation to the later inscriptions from Bodhgaya, the Song period ones, and that is the reference to Maitreya in connection with the site of enlightenment. From an inscription found at Lungmen near Luoyang, we know that Wang Xuanci himself had an affinity to Maitreya. According to the inscription, he had a Maitreya statue erected for the sake of the living beings in the Dharmadhatu run. In another fragment from Wang's lost record, Wang recounts the narrative of the production of the true image of the Buddha enshrined in the Mahabodhi Temple, to which he refers in the inscription, if you remember, which became very famous and influential in China, the so-called Zhenxiang or Zhenrong, so the true image of Buddha. Because the story goes, as Wang confirms Xuanzang's narrative with slight differences, that a Brahmana or a local community, depending on which versions you are reading, after erecting the Mahabodhi temple, wanted to make a statue of the Buddha inside, to be placed inside of the temple. And a foreign artisan arrived and promised to create an authentic image of the Buddha with all the marks, the 32 minor marks and all the major marks and the minor marks. He asked for scented mud and enough oil for the lamp, and to be locked in the temple for half a year without being disturbed. After the time was almost up, people became a little bit worried and opened the temple. And the artisan had disappeared, but the statue was there almost complete. And they heard a voice in the air saying, "I am Maitreya, I have created this image, the true image of the Buddha." So that's the story that we have about the image, the original image inside of the Mahabodhi temple, to which also the later inscriptions actually refer. The connection between Maitreya and the site of enlightenment, which is reflected in this story, may have been the idea that Maitreya takes care of the place where his predecessors reached, and that he himself will reach enlightenment, as all the Buddhas attain enlightenment at the same place in Bodhgaya. Bodhgaya, therefore, could be identified as a place where a vow to be reborn in Tushita heaven near Bodhisattva Maitreya, or even a vow to be reborn underneath the Pushpanaga tree, where Maitreya, after he became a Buddha, is actually turning the wheel of the Dharma, can be achieved, and was, of course, then very particularly effective. Now, evidence to make the Tang period more or less complete, not saying that it was more material, but what we have in the sources. Evidence of another Chinese inscribed stele left by a Chinese monk at the Mahabodhi temple refers to the monastery north of the Mahabodhi temple and was erected by a guy called Dao Xi, whose short biography is reported in I Ching's anthology of the eminent monks going for the search of the Dharma. So I can already see in the case of Sungyun and Wang Xuanci that they erected the inscriptions, and that's what they share with the later inscriptions, on direct or indirect behalf of the imperial court, with the interest in generating the religious benefit, the merit, the punya or the gongde, through donations to eminent Buddhist places in India, which could be then transferred, that would be the Sanskrit term parinama, transfer of merit, in a more universal way, either to all living beings, which is quite normal, or in this specific case, to their rulers and sponsors at home. The envoys or travelers could act as imperial agents with a mixture of official and more personal religious agenda, but also as the interface between imperial interests and Buddhist soteriology. Chinese emperors were either concerned with doing what Buddhist lay people mostly did, supporting the Sangha, to gain merit, or at least they had to deal with the mundane affairs and regulations of the Buddhist community. The post-Tang evidence of Chinese presence in Bodhgaya, expressed in the inscriptions, demonstrates both aspects more clearly than the earlier examples discussed so far. So we're now switching to the next chapter, which I gave the title Chinese Visitors in Bodhgaya After the Tang. Chinese inscriptions from Bodhgaya and Buddhist historiography of the Song period. Okay. Now, since the discovery and partial publication in Alexander Cunningham's seminal monograph on the place of enlightenment on Bodhgaya from the year 1892, the Chinese inscriptions from Bodhgaya have not received attention deserved after Chavannes, French scholars' seminal studies in the year 1896 and 97. And some reason for that is that they were inaccessible. They were stored away in some Indian museums, as we will see. Now, this is Bodhgaya, the Mahabodhi Temple, old picture, already after restoration. On the right-hand side, you can see the popularity of this in Indian Buddhism. So it's been preserved on a lot of plaques, where you actually can see also the Buddha sitting, the Buddha statue sitting inside. In this case, actually not in the earth-touching typical gesture, but normally that's the case. This is the statue, much later statue, actually a Pala 8th, 9th century, 8th, 9th century or even later statue from the Pala period, which is now venerated inside of the temple, if you've ever been there. And on the right-hand side, you have probably something that the original statue must have looked alike, because it probably was from the Gupta period, from, let's say, the 3rd, 4th century. And you can see it in a typical earth-touching gesture. Again, a plaque of the Buddha inside of the Mahabodhi. That's Bihar, 9th century, now in the Cleveland Museum of Art. It all shows the popularity of the site, right? The Mahabodhi temple with the Buddha image inside has been the focus. Now, this is Cunningham's plan of the area around the Mahabodhi temple. So the Mahabodhi temple is here, and I've marked 3 sites Cunningham actually marks as well, as the places where 3 of the inscriptions were found, right? So quite scattered, as you can see. Now these are the inscriptions as they were published in Chavannes, French scholar's seminal Les Inscriptions chinoises de Bodhgaya in 1896. So you can see the quality. No? It's actually quite good compared to what you find in Cunningham's original publication, but it's certainly not really good enough to do some kind of more detailed studies. So this changed when a couple of years ago, some of the inscriptions from Bodhgaya were rediscovered in the holdings in the catacombs of the Indian Museum in Kolkata. A couple of years ago, actually tried to trace them, to hunt them down, and I knew from catalogs, we scholars knew from catalogs that they should, some of them should be in the Indian Museum, but whenever you wrote to them, they would either say, we don't know, we don't have them, so we were deflected, so no chance actually to get the originals. So just to give you a kind of anecdotal idea how I got to this kind of project, side project. I think it was 2 years ago, just past COVID, I was approached by a colleague, an Italian archaeologist working in India, on Bihar, who was supposed to publish a book on Bodhgaya, on place of enlightenment. And she asked me, would you like to do the inscriptions? I said, yeah, well, not with that old stuff, that's not good enough. And said, no, and sent me pictures, high-resolution pictures of 3 of the inscriptions that were in the Indian. I said, where did you get them from? I said, yeah, from the Indian Museum. So finally, they actually recovered them and brought them up, kind of took photos, very good photos. And I even had the chance actually to visit the Indian Museum and touch the stone. So I was directly in front of them. But that's the high-resolution picture of the longest inscription we have from Bodhgaya, which I was given in the first place. Now, the quality of the inscriptions, both in aesthetical, calligraphical terms, and craftsmanship is very diverse. So they're not the same quality. There are characters written differently in the same inscription, and the quality and style moves between very traditionally executed and very rude and even wrong forms of characters. The conclusion from this is, and that is probably true for all Chinese inscriptions which were ever produced in India, probably there were more, but just have those we have, that the inscriptions were chiseled into the stone by local stonemasons of different talents and qualities. But one also has to take into account, to be fair, the quality of the Vorlage, of the template given by their Chinese clients or commissioners, of which we know, of course, next to nothing. The contextualized reading of the inscriptions reveals a dense network of Buddhist activities linked to the imperial Sung household. They all are, with one exception from the early Sung period, which are in general agreement with what is known from other sources, from the historiographical sources from the Sung period. It is obvious that Maitreya and the soteriological concept and practices of veneration around this bodhisattva or Buddha are a motive which links all inscriptions and constitute the longue durée since the Tang dynasty all the way up to the Sung dynasty. This is congruent with the idea that all Buddhas, hence also the Buddha of the future Maitreya, achieve enlightenment at the same place, a place that is Bodhgaya. On the other hand, as it is clearly expressed in inscriptions, like for instance, inscription number 1, I labeled this one number 1, Maitreya already had interfered with the place by creating that famous Buddha image that is enshrined inside of the temple. So there was a link between the, let's say, the millennialist expectation that Maitreya would come and actually reach enlightenment there. But at the same time, he had already kind of done something to the place. I'm now going very briefly through the inscriptions so that you get a kind of an idea what, how they look like, what they are in terms of length, and some of them are pretty much damaged, as you will see. Now, inscription number 1, as I label it number 1 because it's the longest, it's the biggest. That's huge, right? That's a long inscription. The place, Indian Museum in Kolkata, as I said, recently rediscovered. It's the longest of the 6 or even 7 inscriptions from Bodhgaya. It is complemented by inscription 2 and 3, which I will show you in a moment. The long inscription is well construed, both formally and in terms of content. It's a poetic part, it has a prose part at the beginning, a poetic part in the middle, and then some kind of explanations when the stone was erected, who commissioned it, etc., as you would expect. A counter-check with full-fledged terminology in Buddhist texts of the text itself often helps to get a grip of the intended meaning of the passages, otherwise difficult to understand. There seems to be a certain affinity to Avatamsaka, to Huayan terminology, but also influence from other Buddhist texts like the Vimalakirti Nirdesha and sutras linked, of course, to the veneration of Maitreya, because that is very important for these guys. Now, bringing some of the details and pieces of information now into the context of Chinese Buddhism of the time of the early Sung, as I will venture at the end of the talk, shows that the author of this author in inverted commas, mission or whatever you call the guy, a monk called Puyin, was, as other inscriptions reflect as well, a semi-official visitor of Bodhgaya who acted on the spiritual behalf of the Sung emperor or Sung emperors in some cases. So now you get some details, of course, partly to show you the quality question, right? I mean, you can already see, I mean, really, is this, should you really do Da like this? The Guo here is, well, a kind of a Jietizi, but the other inscriptions then have the long version, but distorted, so it's going forth and back. Probably what they could manage to do, these Indians, they try to do. What is surprising is that they actually kept the kind of box format of things. That's pretty good in comparison with other specimens we know from outside of India. On the right, no, that was the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, this one I have chosen because of this. I told you that the monk who commissioned this inscription, the longest one we have, is called Khyentse. This is Khyentse. And read it. But what happened here, obviously, is that the two characters are conflated into one. We don't know exactly, actually, that confused the first interpreters and readers of the inscription in the late 19th century. They actually thought the guy was called Yun Shu. Because something is wrong up here, just forget about it and just read the lower part and then we got the name. But of course, there is no Yun Shu in any Buddhist text, but there is actually, as we will see, a Khyentse in Sung period texts. So that confirms, of course, that something went wrong here. That obviously maybe, I mean, that's speculative, that the Indian guy actually got it wrong with the box. Said, okay, this belongs together. I have to put it into one box, and then you get this. One of the many kind of pitfalls and interesting parts in these inscriptions. I mean, even these short pieces can tell you already there's quite different qualities. Sometimes they insert, so obviously no idea what then happens. So suddenly two characters are chiseled at the side of the line. Maybe the stonemason forgot them, and then the Chinese guy comes and says, "Yeah, you missed something. You have to add it." Okay, that's the longer one. Interesting, of course, is also for the art historians the headpiece, because that's not Chinese, right? That's not what you would find in a Chinese inscription of that period. With the typical, what you would expect from Bodhgaya, the Buddha sitting in a niche, probably the temple being represented in a very kind of a formalized way, with a typical earth touching gesture. So that is supposed to be the image that was inside of the Bodhgaya temple. At that time, when the Sung pilgrims came, probably already the statue that I showed you before, the renewed one, right? And then you have the Kumarichis in the niches to the side. They are linked to solar symbolism. I'm not going into this because I'm not an art historian. I have to rely on what art historians tell me. But clearly, an attempt to adapt Indian style, right? These are inscriptions, what I call number 2 and 3. And they belong clearly, they are cross-references to the long inscription. So these two guys, or the names that show up in these two inscriptions, short inscriptions, actually clearly belonged to the greater group that visited Bodhgaya together with this guy called Puyin. Now, this one is an interesting one. What I call number 4 in sequence. It should probably be number 1 in terms of chronology. Because it is the most official one of all of them. We'll come to that in a moment. I think I have it already. No, I'll come to that later. So just bear with me. You see, there is no original photograph. It's just a rubbing. According to Cunningham, this was found, and the rubbing was made when Cunningham visited the local Shaiva temple. The Shaiva high priest actually is still nowadays, and was at that time, in control of the Mahabodhi temple. It was his property, and there was even a legal problem with the Buddhists who wanted Mahabodhi back, and the Shaiva Mahant said no. But Cunningham found this, Cunningham's words, in the shrine, in the Shaiva shrine, kind of in the wall of the Shaiva Mahant's residence, in a kind of a shrine, and took the rubbing. And that's what we have. That's it. And we tried several times to find it. We went to it's still there. So we went to the building, we went around, we looked, and we didn't find anything. So no idea where this is, but this is inscription number 4, to which I'll return later. Inscription number 5 also was only preserved as a rubbing until recently. This was the rubbing that was published in Cunningham's Bodhgaya book. And you see it's broken already on the rubbing. The lower piece is missing. You can identify a couple of characters, sometimes 1, sometimes 2, and that's it. Right? And of course, you have the title. You have on the rubbing not clear, well, you can discern a Buddha again in niche with a hand-touching gesture that we already kind of can identify as an iconographical feature of these inscriptions. Last year, I think it was early morning, I opened my phone and I'm in contact with the curator of the Bihar Museum, the new Bihar Museum, who's at the moment transferring the holdings of the old Patna Museum, the same city, so very close to that place, Bodhgaya, the capital of Bihar, from the holdings, from the catacombs of the museum into the new, beautifully done Bihar Museum. We have all the Pala statues, all the stuff that was retrieved and did not make it into the Indian Museum, went to Bihar, stayed in Bihar, is now there. And they're transferring all the stuff from the catacombs, from the old one, colonial museum, to the new one. In the process, they discover stuff, obviously, that has not been catalogued and comes to the light for the first time in some cases. See what happened? In the morning, I get a picture and it's the stone. They found it. Identical, right? It's the same. Now we have it now physically again. Doesn't help very much in terms of content because, I mean, this is what we have of the text. That's it. But obviously what it shows, there was more activity. The title itself is a bit strange. You see, it talks about the kind of canopy on top of the Vajrasana of the Jingangzuo. What is that? Did they give that? And is that a memorial stone to remind people that they're actually given something to the Vajrasana, to the Jingangzuo? Difficult without the text, right? Inscription number 6. An interesting piece, and this should be number 1. This really should be number 1 chronologically, because it says something of what you see, first of all. You see a very strange layout. You see the 6 Buddhas of the past, right? You see Shakyamuni on the right-hand side, and on the very utmost right-hand side, you have Maitreya. So Maitreya, again, that's the important iconographic part here. The Chinese then, strangely, is written like this. Okay. Indians can't read that anyway, so it doesn't really matter how we write it. No, that's probably not the reason for it. I don't know. I have no explanation why this setup actually has been used. So there are 3 lines, quite nicely separated by a line. There's more a character here on the curved side here, which is not shown here. So this is actually what was in Chavan's French publication on the inscriptions. And this is the text done according to the stone itself, which has been retrieved again as the other, number 1, number 2, number 3, in the Indian Museum in Kolkata. So the stone is back, so to speak. This is not a good photo. I wasn't able actually to take a photo of this one. We need probably better photos of this one, but it can be read. And that's the text. So I'm not going to do a reading class right now because I have time. So this is my tentative translation, and I'm not going into details because it will take too much of my time. I want to cover a little bit more space. So it tells you the name of the monk who commissioned it. And what is interesting, of course, is the dynasty. The great kingdom of Han. Da Han Guo. Go back to the transliteration. No, it can't be from the Han period, right? And of course it's not. It's that very short-lived Han period, the Great Han, which was around, but correct me, Albert, if I'm wrong, 947 to 951, probably hung on a little bit longer, and then was kind of conquered and subdued by the Song. Yeah. So this is then the oldest we have, but it has all the features which I would now expect from an inscription from Bodhgaya. Yeah, before the Song already, people did this, obviously. So we got the person actually commissioning it. We got other monks actually mentioned, obviously were in the group. So another information we get is that these were not single guys, individual guys like in the Tang period. These were mostly groups of monks that went to Bodhgaya. Yeah? It refers to the kingdom of Magadha. It again says something about being reborn in the palace of Maitreya. It says something about a Maitreya-related sutra, the Sutra of Rebirth Up in Heaven of Maitreya, that can be identified, popular text at that time, obviously. Maitreya is all over the place here. He's the kind of important soteriological figure on this inscription. And this now, and I'll come to this and the meaning of it in a moment. This was another early morning surprise. When I opened my phone last September, I had a message from my curator in the Beer Harmony saying, "Oh, we found another one." And this is completely new. I was a bit disappointed, of course, because completely broken off, no main text. Well, it has again the earth-touching gesture. It has Buddha sitting in the niche, representing probably the Mahabodhi temple. And then it says something about, well, go to the last ones, 身教什么序, huh? So the preface to the holy teaching of the Sanzang of the Tripitaka and of a new translation. Or I started from the wrong side. Should have started over there. But you get it. What is it? So what's going on here? Suspension kind of kept up. We come to that later. Without any context, this doesn't really make sense. It's another headpiece of a stone, of an inscription, obviously again from the Sung period, but not much you can do with it. Contextualize what's going on. Why is there a forward to the Tripitaka? What's going on? But this one probably can teach us something, that you never should give up hope. There's always the chance that some more material will be discovered in Indian museums. Yeah. So going back to this one, rediscovered just recently, completely new, this one, which certainly had something. It had probably this Sun Jiao Xu in some form. Yeah. Come back to that one. Now I would like to concentrate on inscription number 4, which is, as I told you, the most official one, because it's referring to all kinds of imperial figures, as you can already see when you just skim across it. I've highlighted this one because it's the name of the monk who commissioned the inscription. So it's called Huaiwen. And this figure actually is a good example where you can demonstrate that, well, this name actually is found in Sung historiographies quite often, and obviously has been a pertinent India traveler. He's been in India at least 3 times, probably even more. Always commissioned by the emperor, always kind of sent by the emperor to do something. Of course, the text then say exactly the opposite, that the monk asked for permission to be able to go to India, and the emperor granted it. But probably the emperor actually just said, go do this. This is, remember, the rubbing, where we have no original stone. Unfortunately, of course, this is exactly the one I would like to see in the original, but it's only in the rubbing. But it's clear enough to actually make sense of it. This is my, again, tentative translation. The emperor of the Great Sung and the Empress Dowager had one stupa built on behalf of Emperor Taizong. So the actual emperor, I think it's the 3rd of the Sung, Southern Sung dynasty, the Empress Dowager would have been his daughter-in-law, and the ruling emperor is the 3rd generation, Taizong. So under the rule of the, and then come all these names, saintly, civilized, circumspectly, belligerent, benevolent, emperor of the Great Sung. You can identify them, of course, by these epithets. And the Empress Dowager, responsive to the end again and again and again. Wholly through compassion, respectfully sent the monk Huaiwen to the kingdom of Magadha to build a stupa next to the diamond seat as an offering on behalf of Emperor Taizong, who's already dead, etc., etc., etc. Emperor Taizong humbly had made a vow to retreat to the heavenly palace to personally receive the prophecy of the Buddha, that he then would realize the position of a true immortal, would constantly reside near the venerated one Buddha, probably Maitreya, of Chakra and Brahman, and that this grants more the divine power and lets authority of the dynasty of the Sung prosper forever. This was recorded at the time of the 19th day of the 1st month of the 2nd year of the era Mingdao, in the cyclical year Guiyou, inscribed on the date, etc., etc. So the dates are a little bit tricky. I read them as you get two dates, different dates. I read them as the date of visit and the date of the erection of the stele. So 33 would be the visit, maybe the commissioning of the stele, and 36 would be 1036 would be the date of erection or the revisit of the monk to the site. Yeah. And now remember, this guy went to India several times. We'll talk about that in a little bit later. So the imperial agents, Emperor Taizong, who already was dead at the time when this previous inscription was erected, so posthumously dedicated to him. The Emperor Zhengzong and son, who is, by the way, interestingly not mentioned in the inscription. So his own empress probably didn't hold him in high regard, at least not high enough to be put on the stele as well. And her adoptive son, Emperor Renzong. So these were the agents on the inscription. So all imperial, highly imperial. Okay. Now we turn from the inscriptions. Of course, there would be much more to be said about these, but I will restrict myself to give you a couple of examples where some of these figures, these agents, actually appear in Sung historiographies. And it's that person in the last inscription, Huai Wen, on which I will concentrate. So Huai Wen's journeys to India are recorded in the Fozu Tongji by Zhi Pan. Well, that kind of Sung period Buddhist historiography, where it says, the Chuan Ha Yuan says, the Shramana Huai Wen had already gone a second time to India to build a stupa next to the diamond seat on behalf of Emperor Zhenzong. Now, that means in the 9th year of the era Tiansheng, 1031, he wanted to go again to build two stupas on behalf of the present ruler and the Empress Dowager, and he asked to be given the preface to the holy teaching by the previous emperor, the written vow of the Empress Dowager, and the praise of the three jewels, the Sanbao Zan, of the holy ruler Renzong, to be inscribed on stone beneath the stupas, and to have a kashaya, a monastic robe, made as an offering for the statue of the Buddha Shakyamuni. That's the one inside of the temple. An imperial consent was issued, and also a court scribe was ordered to compile, after return, the memorial of the third journey to India of the Shramana Huai Wen. So that's a reference point of at least 3 journeys which this person actually made. But and this actually struck me just this morning when I reread my presentation, my paper. If I scroll back, you probably can already smell the red, right? I'm talking about this recently found piece, which has the preface of the holy teaching, has Sanzang, has the new translation, and we know that, of course, there were all these new translations, translation activities by started by the Sung court. So this fits together 100%. Right? This obviously is the inscription that is mentioned in the Sung historiography, which was obviously really erected, and probably, I guess, had the preface to the canon which the emperor actually had written on the bottom. So I have, because I just discovered the link this morning, I have of course looked for the preface. That would be the next task. Actually, see what was actually underneath and how big was the stone, for instance, because the preface has a certain size. At the same time, you can actually imply that the other 3 stone inscriptions by the Empress Dowager and by Emperor Renzong probably were also really commissioned in Bodhgaya. They just haven't appeared yet. So maybe we are in for a surprise in the future. I don't know. I don't know what is actually left in the cellars of the Patna Museum. So this now, you probably understand why this is important, and there is much more material. where you have a match not only between the monk on the inscription, but also in the historiography, but also a match between a lot of other things. So you do not only have the continuity of content in the different inscriptions we have, references to Maitreya, to that true image of the Buddha inside of the Mahabodhi temple, but you have a complete kind of contextualized something that you can actually fit together. We have these guys. So the preface to the Holy Teaching. So what we still, of course, could actually discover is this, and maybe also the other text that was commissioned by the emperor. More material from these texts in the 5th month of the 2nd year of the era Baoyuan, 1039. Again, Huaiwen returned from his 3rd journey to India together with Shramanas Deji, Yongding, and De'an from the kingdom of Magadha in central India, and submitted to the throne the relics of the Buddha's bone, Sanskrit sutras written on palm leaves, seeds of the Ashwatha tree, leaves from the Bodhi tree, leaves from the Ashoka tree, seeds of the Bodhi tree, a Chintamani pearl, and 90 inscriptions from India. And at an imperial audience, he was expressed recognition of his hardship and given the name of Great Master revealing the teaching, Qianjiao Da Shi, a purple robe and golden cloth. Probably very richly gold ornamented piece of cloth. Now, this is interesting because again, it's the same name. It also gives you again, confirms that they were always traveling in groups, right? They were always, it was always a travel party of several monks, probably even more than the ones that made it into the historiography. It also interestingly tells us that actually they sometimes brought more stuff home than they brought to India. Yeah, that's quite a lot. I mean, what do you do with it? Distribute it in the imperial household, so everybody gets a little bit of a Bodhi tree leaf and this and that. And we also can see that these people who traveled several times actually went up the rank ladder. So they were kind of bestowed imperial titles, Buddhist imperial titles, whatever they were meant to mean. They actually went up the ladder when they came back and had success. And here we go again. He comes up in another passage in the 2nd year. That's an earlier journey. Obviously, that's probably his first. In the spring of the 1st year of the era Tianxi, 1070s, the Shramana and Sanskrit scholar Wen Shi, who also, we don't have an inscription from this guy, but he certainly also was very active and productive, asked for permission to go to India, and imperial permission was granted to him to depart, and the Shramanas Zhiyan and Chunggao were charged with the task of proofreaders. In the 8th month of the autumn, the Shramana Fengyong, this is the passage, the whole passage I gave you, because it shows the almost frantic move in 1 year of people going to India and coming back. Yeah. Which is in accordance with what actually Ran Yinhua, the Chinese scholar, actually had published in a seminal article on Sung period travel parties to India, where actually had stated that if you look at the numbers that you can collect and what he had done, that the number of Chinese monks going to India in that period, early Sung period, was double the number of the Indian monks that came to China. Why did Indian monks come to China? Because the Sung emperors had started a fresh project of translating scriptures. And that, of course, is confirmed by these texts. They tell you that they brought back texts, they brought back sutras, even to the point that said they brought back bodhis, so Indian style texts. So we don't have to read out this one. Here again, we have to deal with probably the 2nd tour of Huaiwen. In the 1st month, in spring of the 1st year of the era Tiansheng, the Shramana and Sanskrit scholar Wen Shi and the Shramanas Huaiwen, Xingmei, Zhitan, Chunggao, and Zhongpu from the eastern capital returned from India and submitted to the throne 25 bundles of Sanskrit sutras, bone relics of the Buddha, wherever they came from, a Chintamani pearl, and leaves from the Bodhi tree. So you can also see a certain consistency in the products they brought back. Yeah. Of course, Bodhi tree leaves that comes not from any Bodhi tree in India. Maybe they cheated and took them from some other trees, but it's very probable that they actually took it from the Bodhi tree at the place of enlightenment. More information. So if you bring together all that, you can get actually a quite good picture of, let's say, 100 years of highly dense activities of monks going to India, commissioned by the imperial court to do certain things, to give something to the throne of enlightenment, to bring back not only merit, but also objects, material culture. Now, the difference between, I would say, and with that, I think I should then stop. The difference between the Tang monks, the Tang travelers, including also, of course, semi-official visitors like Wang Xuanze, and these Sung visitors is quite clear. These were, in the Tang period, they were individuals. If they were part of a group like Wang Xuanze, they still went to the places as individuals and paid their reference and did things. While in the Sung period, they went together as groups. And they were monks. The Tang period, we have not much evidence that, for instance, Xuanzang never really, as far as we have material, commissioned the stealing. Lay people like Wang Xuanze did. Mostly lay people. Here, it's mostly, almost exclusively monks. It's very often the same person who goes. They're always going in groups. And they have a certain idea what actually to expect there. They go to venerate, to see the true image of the Buddha, to reap the merit by doing veneration, by giving presents to the diamond throne, to the Jinggang Zuo. And to transfer that merit, it's actually spelled out directly in inscription number 1. This Ke Xun actually says, and then I want to transfer the merit to my emperor. So it's a slightly different setting in that period, but then immediately at some point stops. So there's obviously, it's not going beyond into the second half of the 11th century. Whatever reasons there are, but maybe Albert can enlighten me what could be the reason for that. Maybe. And with this, I would like to stop and open the floor, if I may, for questions, if there are some.